This session is called Uber, but I don't know whether we're going to be talking about Uber. You can if you wish. But we're going to be talking about automated transport systems, driverless cars. In some ways, the question which is being addressed in many of the sessions today is like, why are we having this conversation? So we don't necessarily want to have a completely technical discussion about drive shafts and what have you. We want to really try to have the political conversation about what the benefits, merits and demerits are of driverless cars, automated technology, as well as what this represents about our time that we are having this considered discussion. So we have a big panel, and these are the order in which they will speak. On my immediate right, we have Jason Walsh, foreign correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor, which has nothing to do with Christianity,
no.
Science,
no.
Or lizards.
No.
Previously, the Ireland correspondent, contributed to other publications, including The Independent, City AM, and the Irish Times, and is completing a PhD in philosophy at the University College Dublin. Next, we'll have Nicole Agba is colour and materials designer. She won Autocar Coolland Next Generation Award for her innovative idea on biometric steering that can detect whether a person is too drunk or too tired to drive. In my day, they called that the wife. Then we have Chris Moody, Chief Business Development Officer at Transport Systems Catapult. Previously the Head of Innovation. He joined the Catapult from Oxford University subsidiary ISIS Innovation, which obviously changed its name. Not really a great brand at the moment. There he led the development and delivery of a variety of innovation projects with industry, universities and government in over 30 countries. Then we have Susan. Susan leads a program of research into large-scale data analytics and the role of new forms of data in developing sustainable transport policy. Her research includes the use of social media, mobility profiling, and the role of web-enabled technologies. That means you're very rarely off Facebook. Is that right? Yes. And then finally we have Paul Reeves, designer of engineering software. Previously he's worked at Airbus, Aviva, and Warwick University, producing computer software. So he's rarely off Xbox. So that's our panel, a broad range of knowledge and opinion. Okay, Jason, over to you.
Thank you. 4 minutes.
Yeah.
That's terrible because I have 10 minutes of material, so...
Speak fast.
Speak quick. 2 days ago, in anticipation of this debate, I had a story published in the City AM newspaper, and because it's a newspaper, space was at a premium, so a couple of bits got cut out, including a joke about ladders being government fiats, but also something about how diesels should never have been privileged over petrol cars. This was in the wake of the Volkswagen scandal. But the thing that I found most interesting was the response to my article, which had very little to do with what I actually wrote. I got an entirely hostile and negative response, as I get to everything I write. And the first response was from sort of dirigiste lefties who just were very angry at me for suggesting that cars were a good thing. Then a bunch of libertarians attacked me and called me anti-freedom because I wasn't so sure about autonomous cars. And then 16 hours later, the cyclists attacked me, presumably because it takes them a while to get there. I should point out I own a bicycle, and after the abuse I've received in the last couple of days, I'm never getting on it again because I just don't want to be associated with them anymore. But what I was trying to write in the article and what I'm going to argue today is that I'm really deeply suspicious of having new technologies foisted on us. And a friend of mine told me this makes me a conservative, which gave me pause for thought, and then I thought I'm a little bit old to be dressing up in spandex and bako foil and shouting welcome to the future, so I can live with that. I can live with the fact that I'm going to make the conservative argument today, and that is that I think the autonomous car is not truly an autonomous device. The car might be autonomous, but I think it restricts our autonomy, and it's the self-driven, driven by a human car that actually provides the most freedom, the mass freedom for all of us. I just want to quickly dispense with the powertrain issue. There's nothing wrong with alternative powertrains. Hydrogen's interesting. Toyota is lending its hydrogen fuel cell car out to journalists at the moment. I'm looking forward to reading more about that. Electric cars, in theory, I have no problem with, but the range isn't there, and that's a limitation of battery physics. We'll get past that at some point, I hope. Who knows? I'm not wed to the internal combustion engine. The thing is, a car needs to be able to be refueled in minutes, and if it can't, it's not a serious car. It's a second car, or it's something that is for someone who lives in an urban area, like the centre of London, like around here. We have a word for those kind of people where I come from. We call them the rich. I'm glad that people like that don't need cars that can get from Fortnum and Mason to Selfridges on foot or, unicycle. I can't. I've got stuff to do. The car, for me, has been liberation. I didn't start driving until I was almost 30. At the time I was working as a reporter, and believe me, it's a very difficult job to do when you have to traverse the country on buses. Autonomous cars, I am not going to deny the potential benefits of them. Increased mobility for disabled and elderly people, increased safety, no doubt, and decreased congestion if the traffic patterns are under control. But it's not driving. Driving is a particular thing. There's a specificity to driving, and I think that specificity matters. I do find it puzzling that in a world where people complain we're locked out of the housing market by apparently rampant capitalism, that the same people herald an end to car ownership as if owning a car is just an albatross around your neck. That seems a strange attitude to take. Likewise, we're told over and over again to beware electronic gadgets like these.
If I said you had 1 minute left, would you panic?
Yes. I'll skip to the end. Why would we hand our mobility and our freedom over to the people who make the devices that we're told are constantly tracking us and being used against us? Cars represent freedom. Freedom isn't always fun. I just paid 400 quid for a service. Of course it isn't. But freedom doesn't mean having Sancerre rubbed into your thighs in the south of France. Freedom also includes danger, failure, responsibility, the possibility that you're going to get stuck in traffic and have a lousy day, but you're still the person in charge. And I think that the autonomous vehicle, while it's not going to enslave us, it's not a feudal device, I do think it means that insurance companies will price the rest of us off the roads as soon as the technology is perfected. We will lose the need to make thousands of ethical choices every day, which is what you do when you sit behind the wheel. And I think that this is going to have a profound effect on us. I think that we're trading actual freedom with all of its difficulties for a kind of algorithmic A to B.
Nicole?
We're living in an ever-changing society where we're being forced to switch into new technology very quickly, and that's happened in cars and vehicles. I'm sort of coming at it from a design point of view, as I'm an automotive designer. The problem with that is that although cars are evolving ever so quickly and technology in them is evolving ever so quickly, the driver behaviour hasn't adjusted to that. And so that's what I sort of think is the issue with autonomous driving. Yes, I think it's something that eventually would happen, and there are a lot of benefits to it. However, it's not for right now, and it's not for this generation. The reason why I want this panel is because I won the Auto Car Next Generation Award. And the project that I designed was a biometric steering wheel that could detect whether you were too drunk or too tired to drive. Now, that's a sort of semi-autonomous feature, whereby the car would prompt you. It wouldn't take control, but it would prompt you. And I think that semi-autonomous features and devices are probably a more realistic way forward, such as your cruise control. Maybe if you're on the highway for a really long period of time, having the vehicle be taken over for a certain amount of time is more likely the way forward. I think in certain areas and certain environments, autonomous vehicles would be the way forward, such as you're in the cities or areas where you're transporting from a really minor city where all the jobs are located in a bigger city. The kind of market that would buy into the autonomous vehicles probably haven't been born yet. The younger generation are probably leaning more towards having automatic cars. I myself am quite young, I'm 23, but I only just started driving about 6 months ago, and I absolutely love driving. And that's the reason why I'm not for autonomous vehicles at the moment. The thing about driving is that it gives you the freedom to go forward and to do what you want to do. But from a design point of view, we're sort of being pushed into the technology going faster than I think society and generation is ready for. There are a lot of plans in place that the SMMT have already put plans in place of how they want to take autonomous vehicles into the future. And they've got a plan until 2050 where they want complete autonomous vehicles to be in effect. That's something that I don't necessarily see as feasible. However, I think it's a way that we can move forward. Autonomous vehicles give us more safety, reduced congestion. They can be good for certain aspects and certain environments.
You've had your 4 minutes, so thank you very much. Chris?
Well, I'm going to take a little bit counter view to our first two speakers. And the one thing we know for sure is that none of us will be right. And we can't predict the future. So I'm going to give you predictions about the future. First of all, I think there are three things that are coming together at the same time, and we're not sure how it's going to play out. One is electrification of vehicles. Second is autonomy in vehicles. And the third is more sharing of vehicles and vehicles on demand. And I think these three things are going to cause more change in the transportation world in the next 10 years than in the last 100. Let me give you some ideas about what I'm guessing will happen in the next 20 years. First of all, cars will gain in popularity, not decrease, as a mode of transport of choice for most people. Private ownership of cars will decrease. The total number of cars will decrease, because right now, most cars sit parked 90% of the time or more, which is an incredibly inefficient use of a lot of capital tied up there. So I think that shared use of vehicles, just by the economic imperative of it, will become the norm. The total number of cars, will decrease, but also the use of mass transit, I think, will decrease, and more people will opt to get around and be mobile with autonomous vehicles that are independent. Virtually all jobs for taxi drivers, lorry drivers, and bus drivers will be gone within 20 years, maybe faster. The first autonomous vehicles will be available to buy within 5 years, and I think be common in 10 years, and I think you'll see very few driven cars in 15 years. The cost of mobility in urban areas is probably reaching its peak right now, where people are really feeling the pinch, especially if you live in London, of getting to work and back every day on the cost of mass transit. So I think that, again, the shared use of electric vehicles will be very cheap, and that will suck travelers away from mass transit. Another interesting one that may be one for discussion is that I believe that flying electric cars will become available in the next 15 to 20 years, mainly driven by the improved density of power to the weight of batteries and the lower cost of batteries. And these will be fully automated vehicles. They won't require a pilot's license. The top car makers in 2035 will not be in the top 10 companies today. Who knows who they'll be? Maybe it's Uber, maybe it's Google. More likely it's someone that we don't know of yet. Car sharing companies will be a much larger business than manufacturing of automobiles, which will become, for the large part, commodity. Those are my guesses for the future.
Thank you very much. Susan.
First of all, it's a good idea for us to reflect on why we drive and to consider what the purpose of it is. And the first reason why we drive is to gain access to goods, services, employment, and social interaction. So for many of us, driving is a means to an end. It's a means of having access to things. And that's important, because when it's about having access, it means that we've got choices about how we can do that. Some people in the UK and in the world have more choices about how to get access than others have. And for some communities, having access to a car is and will continue to be very important. There is a subset within that of people who really enjoy driving. I think there's, that is driving as a pleasure is a separate issue. And I think that the opportunity to drive for pleasure will continue. But over time, the extent to which driving and car ownership is about access, I think will become less, it will become less about access, and it will become more about a choice, a positive choice, where people do it more for pleasure than being for access. The second point that I want to make is that driving is a behaviour that already takes place within a system. So when we go out and drive, now I always hold my hands up and say I am a car driver, so that people understand where I'm coming from. But that is within a system, and how we drive impacts on other people, and how other people drive impacts on ourselves. So although we can go out and think, yes, I'm going to do what I want, I will take the risks for me that I want to take, what we also need to understand is that we're taking risks for other people as well. So we're not on our own, we're not independent. And that matters because, in my opinion, there are some people, and I'll be careful how I say it, who would benefit from being in a driverless vehicle now rather than driving their vehicle. The third thing I want to say is that the primary influence on the future of driving, and I think Jason and also Chris have made this point, I think it will be an economic argument. Driverless vehicles are already starting to go out there. We will see their large-scale introduction in around 5 years' time, I believe. Around 3 years after that, we will be able to do the kind of analysis that demonstrates safety benefits. Then the insurance companies come on board, and there will be a large differential between premiums for driverless vehicles and those for regular driven vehicles, as it were. And that market influence is going to be a big influencer on what happens after that. because I think that we may also see the government taking action, whichever government is. I don't want to go down that route, but I think that taxation is also likely to play a part in this, and there will be incentivisation for people to go into driverless vehicles rather than to drive their own vehicles. So the future that I see, it's not that different to yours in lots of ways, actually, Chris. I think that being a car driver will become a little bit niche, a little bit like being having your pilot's licence is a little bit niche at the moment. I think that the test will become tougher. I think it will be age restricted. I think that you might need to book a slot on the roads, for some particular highways to go out and drive in and amongst the connected highway system. And I think that it could be, I agree actually with Jason, it could be something for the better off rather than for the mass of the population. But actually that doesn't matter in some respects, because everybody who wants to have access to goods, services, education, employment and all the rest of those things, social interaction, will still have access to that through the driverless vehicles. And what we're also in the game of the ageing population. And when I reach 100, and I've said this before as well, although I love driving my car now, I will definitely want a driverless pod out on the drive, so that I've still got the independence that I value, and so that I've still got access to those goods and services. And yes, it will be environmentally friendly, and yes, it will be less of a draw. Yes, it will be more economic for me. It will save time, definitely. So that's where I see things going.
Thank you very much. Paul.
Originally, I had a long section on the backdrop, history of motoring from the 70s to now, but I've distilled it down to 3 things. Increasing fuel prices and panics we'd run out of fuel, congestion and management of traffic, despite the reduced number of fatalities and injuries caused by cars, at least in the UK, or involving cars, increased concern about the unpredictable nature of the idiot at the controls. Taking this very, very time-limited analysis, it could be argued that driverless cars could be seen as a solution to managing increased volumes of traffic controlled by unpredictable rains, and also even reducing the use of fuel, etc. Now, some of the speakers have covered the potential benefits of driverless cars, and I actually agree with that many of them may work out. My simplified thesis, and this is really simplified, is why driverless cars will not happen and what should happen instead and why. Now, many of the proposed benefits of driverless cars stem from them being the dominant mode of transport, if not the only one. And to me, this will take decades, which has sort of been discussed. As an adherent of the make, do and mend society, which we're actually encouraged to follow, I subscribe to Bangonomics. Basically, I buy cheap old cars. There's basically even new cars. Cars nowadays actually last a lot longer, and even Alphas don't rust anymore. Driverless cars fitting onto our existing infrastructure in society, I believe, will struggle to become dominant and gain their proposed benefits. As with most transport and mobility revolutions, looking at the railways and automobile, remnants of the old world will continue to exist, canals and footpaths, etc. But if we want something more like actual mobility on demand, so we can drink and not drive and travel, although I bet that will actually be banned even in automated vehicles, I wouldn't be surprised. We should be looking how we could use all of these wonderful bits of technology around driverless cars, sensors, control, technologies, algorithms, engineering know-how, to build a completely new infrastructure separate from our tarmac-based ones. Now, to me, one principle of automation is that you redesign or reconfigure the product to be suitable for automation. So rather than building more or widening existing roads or trying to squeeze more out of existing ones, we develop and build entirely new ways to achieve mobility on demand. Ways, and I hesitate to use the term road or track, that are related to tarmac roads only in the way that a railway track or motorway is related to the canal. Now, this is just a little aside. One way I believe we could start looking at things is looking at what's happened with containerisation, say, how that revolutionised freight, and maybe that would be a good way of looking how we could achieve mobility on demand. Chris has actually stolen my thunder here, because I was going to end on, I believe that truly driver-controlled cars will always be around. So basically, if you still want to get your kicks on Route 66, sort of like Jason, you can. Maybe in 100 years it'd be a heritage site, partly overgrown with seeds. Personally myself, I'd like to be getting my kicks as I continue through deep middle age with my second-hand red Toyota MR10 Airster, which is a semi-autonomous 2-seat personal flying vehicle full of cheap commodity automated control systems developed for those driverless cars which never quite got off the ground. So yes, the death of motoring, but maybe the birth of piloting.
Let's start with you, Jason. You were talking about freedom to drive, while at the same time 5 people die every week on roads. And I just wondered, because there has been a bit of a discussion between autonomy and social responsibility in this conversation, almost as if they are opposites or in tension. Yes. So you were arguing clearly for the freedom to drive. I was wondering what you thought of Nicole's biometric steering wheel, thing that controls your ability to drive while tired or drunk. Is that a restriction on freedom?
Yeah, it's a complicated. I don't have a direct answer. I'm not being intentionally evasive. In France now, it's illegal to drive without a breathalyzer in your car. I don't know if it's illegal to never use the damn thing, but it has to be there. The steering wheel, I suppose, does the same job automatically. I'm not particularly perturbed by a steering wheel that doesn't allow you to start the car if you are under the influence of alcohol. But what I am perturbed by is just the drip-drip effect, where you slowly lose control over every decision. And I just wonder, at what point do we draw a line and say, no, this is enough interference in how people should be allowed to order their own lives, including put their own lives at risk, and then pay the consequences of putting other people's lives at risk?
Yeah, so. But you've mused on that. So
well, I just want
lead you to?
It leads me to the conclusion that I think that we are living in an increasingly risk-averse society, and I think that we are heading toward the autonomous car, and we are heading toward ever-increasing restrictions. I know that the boiling frog thing isn't actually literally true, but I think we'll get there to the point where it is just seen as obscene to want to be able to do something yourself, for yourself, by yourself, for your own reasons. And I think that, I mean, I also incidentally drive around in ancient old cars that no one wants, because I can't afford expensive cars. I can't even afford cheap cars, and I certainly won't be able to afford a human-driven car if it gets to the point where autonomous cars become the norm. So I just, conservative as I may be apparently on this question, I would seek to arrest the development of autonomous vehicles, because I think they are a threat to driver autonomy and ultimately individual freedom.
Very clear. Nicole, there's a big discussion about maybe we drive too much. So would there be, in your view, a healthy technological addition to a car which maybe says you've driven 500 miles this week and therefore the moral choice to drive a bit more could be taken off you? Would, in terms of like the risk that a driver poses, which is the way you presented, instead of it just being drink and drive and tiredness, it could be that you drive too much, and there could be a moral decision made by the technology to stop you driving too much. Would that be a useful addition?
It'd be a useful addition to have in terms of just alerting you. However, the point of the invention that I created was not to stop you from doing anything, but was more to make you aware of what you're doing. So the idea of making people aware and knowledgeable about the effect that they're having and their impact on the world, yes, have them aware, and then it's sort of up to them to make that conscious decision whether they want to change that. So you could say, for example, you've driven 500 miles this week. I'm not sure you would have driven that many miles, but say you have, why not drive and maybe cycle for 10 miles or something, and then you're sort of giving back to society for the amount of footprints you've put on the road. But that's more of like a suggestion rather than imposing and saying you have to do something. What I think needs to happen is that there needs to be a complete uphold and an evolution of driver behaviour and driver characteristics, which there hasn't been. It's not really changed so much since driving was first invented. What it has in essence was like the introduction of automatic cars and electric vehicles and such, but in terms of how we actually drive and the responsibility that a driver actually hasn't really pushed further, and I think that people need to take that conscious effort into consideration.
Chris, obviously your speech was made up, wasn't it? You just made up a future. You talked about the number of cars will decrease because most of them are parked outside your house for 99% of the time, but that's like a house itself is occupied for maybe 1/3 of the day or 2/3 of the day. Lots of things are uneconomic, but we make the decision as a private autonomous individual that that's what we want to do. So in terms of your sharing future, I dread it. I don't want to share with anybody. I want privacy, I want individuality, I want my own things. I don't want to talk to my neighbour.
I think the future that I see in my head is one where there are many choices on mobility, and you'll have the range of sharing the same vehicle with 5 other people that are going in a similar path, or you'll have a vehicle that'll come just for you, and maybe that's a simple economy vehicle, or it's a very nice luxury vehicle, or you'll have the choice of owning your own automated vehicle. But I think that what most people want, and especially if you talk with younger people in urban areas, they want mobility. And mobility at the lowest cost with the lowest carbon footprint that's the most convenient for them at any given time to go where they need to go. And so I think that these choices of vehicles will be available, and there'll be different types of car sharing services. And but the need to own a car right now, you know, I own a car, my wife has a car, and we do it because we want to be able to go where we want to go when we want to go. And that's the only way to do it today. And so I think in the future you'll have many more choices. So you won't need to own it. But if you want a nice car to take you somewhere, it'll be available. So.
Good, good. The dream's nice anyway. Right, Susan, just in case I misrepresent, I thought you was kind of saying that maybe driving as a task or as a duty might be diminished, and we'd still be able to drive for pleasure and for fun.
The driving task will change, and it will change according to the kind of vehicle, and our concept of what a car actually is will change. But there will be two forms of driving. There will be the driverless driving, which is you basically sat in your driverless pod being transported, and then there will be you with your manual car or automatic or whatever doing driving as we know it now. But I think that will become a different sort of task as well, because we'll be in a mixed vehicle transport system. So in both cases it will change.
All right, well, I'll change my tack then. In terms of your risk analysis of some people, these are moral questions. That's why I'm trying to kind of maybe move us away from a technical question. These are kind of very moral debates. And there's an element of Victorian patrician in the biometric steering wheel, and the idea that some people are maybe a problem on the roads. Do you see any kind of moral issues?
Let me give you a couple of examples. I would actually see it as very enabling to some people to have a driverless vehicle available to them, and at the moment they may be driving in a situation where they themselves know it would actually be better if they weren't driving, but they don't have options for independence and for choice. So I mean, we can talk about elderly people if you like, and I think yes, there are some people, elderly people, maybe in remote communities, who know for themselves that actually it's stressful, it's physical strain, it's a mental strain, it's a strain on the faculties, etc. For them to continue driving, but they still treasure their freedom and they still want access to goods, services, social interaction, etc. And I think it would be enabling for them to have one. Another example is we have colleagues who come over from international countries who've learned to drive in their own country. They come over, they're allowed to drive in the UK for up to a year on their home licence, and I've had some colleagues who've done this, and they found it a huge burden to try and get about on the other side of the road in an unfamiliar system with unfamiliar signage. And I know colleagues who've failed the driving test 4 or 5 times, the British driving test, while still having it's legitimate for them to drive. And I think it would be very enabling for them to be able to say, okay, for this year when I'm over, I'll get a driverless vehicle and still be able to get about. So there are lots of examples like that where I think it's enabling and liberating for people to have this facility.
Yeah, fine. I mean, again, my slight problem is that, like Chris's speech, it's like, obviously I can think of lots of ideas. You know, if I fall down the stairs and I'm injured, it'd be really nice to have a robot carry me to my automated car and take me to hospital, rather than have an ambulance come 1 hour later. Right? We can invent a sci-fi benefit. Yeah. But in terms of what this discussion represents, I'll come to Paul in terms of the mobility revolution that you were talking about, because I want to get to the idea about what this debate represents, the form and the content. Yes. So if I do an analogy of architecture, which is my basic profession, is the idea that there are lots of people building these kind of environmentally friendly, bioclimatic, carbon neutral buildings, and they look great, but the concept behind them is very, it's putting nature first and putting the occupant second. You know, the whole thing becomes, how can we minimize our impact, our detrimental, harmful impact by building this building, So the concept is actually quite anti-human, anti-individual, anti-freedom, while at the same time looking good. So in some ways, the car debate, I think, could be similar in terms of like, we're having this debate about fantastic new technological cars, but what is the actual essence, the kernel of the debate that's actually generating? Why are we having this debate now?
I would have liked to have had a much more longer historical background, but I see two of the things of, since that have changed since the 70s is the kind of we talk about transport management, but quite often we're really talking about management of people, insofar as people do unpredictable things, wrong things. It's increasingly seen that young people are dangerous. Yes, you're 17 or whatever. Chances are, your first time you go driving, or within the first 6 months, you'll have some kind of accident or whatever. Okay, but you will actually learn through that. And so I'm wondering if we try and automate all of the risks and the dangers out of driving, we're actually going to end up with worse drivers ultimately, because they haven't had the ability to either crash or, hopefully not kill someone or something like that, but to go into a ditch or go into the back of some other kind of vehicle. So to me, there has to be some level of risk there for people to become actually better drivers, because you can't drive everything. You can't take risk out of everything.
People won't need to drive. If you look at it from a human rights point of view, on the other side, I propose that we create a conflict that's going to kill 300,000 people a year globally. Is that a good idea? Well, that's how many people die every year in automobile accidents worldwide. And if it were a conflict somewhere, we'd all be up in arms and screaming about it, but we've become accustomed to it. But it's a huge global problem. We have the technology now to prevent that, and there's a moral imperative that we do that.
In the reading for this, I come across those figures. Quite often, these figures are presented in global terms, but then if you drill down a little bit lower, you actually see the injury rates or whatever are far lower in the West, in developed countries. Most of these injuries actually occurring in kind of middle-level countries, maybe Russia or whatever, where basically they've got really poor infrastructure.
Or the United States, which has a very high death rate.
Okay, well, I saw the United States, and it was a map, and I saw the United States, UK, parts of Europe was in the below 10 or whatever they measured.
UK has about the lowest rate.
Yeah, but there was like Russia, parts of Africa, India, middle-level development, and I would have thought that it's almost a different issue. They're the countries that need to develop far more to become, to come to the same level of standard that at least most of the West have got in terms of those things. So I was just thinking it's sometimes slightly disingenuous to actually use the global figure when it's a really patchy thing, and those issues of safety could be addressed, by existing levels of technology anyway.
We'll take 2 or 3 questions.
I'm actually quite disappointed at the lack of conversation about Tesla. And I'm not sure if anyone knows, but they're a fully automatic car company. And about 2 or 3 days ago, they released a beta, which is kind of an early version for their automatic car that they're releasing in about 3 months, completely autonomous. The only thing with the beta version is you have to keep your hands on the steering wheel. So in that way, they're regulating the safety. And it was only released 3 days ago, so I'm not sure if you would have incorporated it into your speech. But I was just going to ask, you're talking about the future like it hasn't happened, but it is happening. And they have released, this is a fully electric car with autonomous steering. So, do you think that it will necessarily be in 50 years that we do have the kind of driving we have now, or do you think that will have been outlawed?
I'd actually like to stop looking decades in the future and just look at the next little bit of the future as we've got it now. If you look at cars built in, and motorcycles built in the 20s and 30s, to drive one you had to advance and retard the ignition up and down hills, you had to pump your own oil, you had to do all sorts of things. So generally speaking, vehicle kind of development has been making easier things for the driver to do, to give the driver less things to do. And that's one of the things that can make the person a much less good driver. If you look at the most highest-selling motorcycle today, and I think look at very expensive cars and look at motorcycles if you want to see what everybody's car is going to look like soon, you'll see that they've got a tremendous amount of what they call driving or rider aids. They have not just the ordinary kind of anti-lock braking systems and things like that. They've got high skyhook suspension, navigation, collision avoidance. How much these new motorbikes can roll is actually decides how much then you can use the brakes. And the brakes are then linked. They're very, very sophisticated because obviously a motorcycle can go in directions that a car can't because it moves in a way that it doesn't. The way that all of these kinds of automatic systems are being involved, they are still not taking the place of the driver in the sense that everyone seems to assume they just will. Remember what the driver does. They don't just sort of brake and go and turn left and right. They really decide where they're going in the first place. It's actually pretty difficult, I think, still to get a driverless car to go where you want it to, get all the way there without being spooked or in other ways distracted. Yes, we will eventually overcome these problems, but the moral is actually confronting us now, isn't it? It's like, how much responsibility do we take for what we do in our cars and on our motorbikes? If you look at the kind of next 5 years, 6 years or so, we're going to have a lot of cars and things that people are going to be claiming to be fairly uncrashable. These are the kind of things that are going to be about just before people start to claim, yes, we've got a really autonomous car. By the time you've done that, the insurance companies, I would argue, will have to be looking at insuring the machine, not the people inside it, in the sense that we do now. If you're insuring a driver, or if you're insuring against something going wrong, and it's not the driver anymore, it's going to be the machine. That's a whole other area of law, insurance, and everything else.
Within the next 15 years, probably the most important thing that will happen is the rise of hyper-realistic virtual environments, virtually indistinguishable from reality. So is the loss of autonomous driving such a loss if you get to race across the surface of Mars instead?
The Tesla example, a fascinating company, and this autopilot that they announced last week has the basic elements for doing fully autonomous driving. It's not legal yet on the road, so you have to follow the law and keep your hands on the wheel. It'll be interesting to see how that works, because I think there's a lot of fear that I think is probably justified about semi-autonomous driving, that the drivers will lose attention and not be engaged with what they're doing on the road. And because they're not having to drive the car, they're not having to maintain the lane, they don't have to worry about the distance to the car in front of them, and they're going to be daydreaming, or in worst cases reading books or talking on the phone and not paying attention. Suddenly something will happen that the car isn't able to deal with, and the driver will take seconds to respond and get back engaged again, which may be too late. So I think that the semi-autonomous systems could actually cause an increase in accidents in the near term, and that fully autonomous will happen much faster, because I think most car companies are becoming quite concerned about semi-autonomous systems.
Tesla, they owned by a libertarian apparently, Elon Musk. Every time some poor chump in America buys a petrol or diesel car, they subsidize Tesla. So cars only made profitable, a company only made profitable by government fiat. I find that fascinating. As for the virtual reality, what a nightmare. I like the difficulties of reality. I've read enough Philip K. Dick novels. I don't want to be having arguments with taxi drivers whose wives don't love them and then find out they've hallucinated the whole thing in a mental hospital. Yes, it might be fun, but it would still be a computer game. It's a lot better than when I was 12 and I played Elite. They have a new version of it now. It's all very sophisticated, but it's not reality. Sometimes you get your heart broken in life. It's worth it.
Tesla, yeah, the technology is readily available, but just because we have the ability to do something doesn't necessarily mean that we should. The law says that autonomous vehicles wouldn't even be allowed in the UK for another 5 years. So although you'd have to then hold on to the steering wheel and all of these other factors are in place, yeah, it's a great idea. The issue is that we're sort of in a society where we all want things. They started putting in place things like self-parking and like reverse parking and things like that into vehicles. When speaking to a lot of consumers who have bought these vehicles, do they use these features? Their answer is no, we don't trust them. So it's almost like, why have it just because you want it and then not use it?
It is true that as technology kicks in, not just into the car market and the transport system, but into other areas as well, that as our level of activities, our type of activity shifts, we do become de-skilled in some areas, but we become more skilled in other areas. I remember manual choke on cars, and yes, I have actually started an engine using a starter motor, but that is not something I want to do every morning. I'll tell you something, it's an absolute bind trying to find that point on the choke. And, give me an automatic car any time, because primarily the car was not about how skilled can I be and how quickly can I start it, all the rest of it. It was about, I need to go somewhere, I need mobility, I need access to goods and services, and I wanted it, particularly on a very cold morning in an isolated location. I wanted convenience, and actually quite a lot of people want that as well, I think. But we do need to watch ourselves with this. Navigation skills now with the devices that on the one hand are very good at getting us from A to B through good routes, etc. On the other hand, people are I propose losing navigation skills, orientation skills around cities. So when we don't have it, or when we're in somewhere that's off the map or whatever, we aren't actually now as good as we should be in terms of finding our way about.
On Tesla, there were lots of these examples of these different things around, and figures are given. They only had so many accidents over so many whatever. Even if it's a large-scale test, it's still not with driverless cars being the dominant form throughout society. I don't know if it's answering Austin's question, but I suppose a lot of this is dealing with unpredictability, and it's like, I almost don't like the term, but is there an acceptable level of unpredictability that results in injuries and results in deaths and whatever? Because my view is humans are almost, what makes humans humans is their unpredictability and willingness to take risks and stuff like this. So I suppose the debate is between those people that have different levels of how they see society should be taking risks at a high level, but also individually. And I must admit, the point about motorcycles was quite interesting as well, because obviously motorcyclists go around and they're more of a risk to themselves and they're more of a risk to other people. But that's just happened, we've accepted it, So I just hate the idea. I just think it'd be a sterile world if driving was fully autonomous. I seriously don't believe it will happen, partly because of what I sort of said in my introduction, but my biggest issue with it is just the drive to take unpredictability throughout human society. And I accept that I don't want to be the person who puts the number up. People will die and people will be injured because of this acceptance of this unpredictability, but I still think ultimately it's a good thing. I think it sounds really horrible, but for those that don't get injured or die, it actually strengthens the rest of society to have this unpredictability and ability to control a ton of metal that's basically a killing machine in some people's views, I guess. And that's where we are.
On the question of war, just incidentally, that was brought up. I mean, I don't want to argue the numbers about it, but there are arguments in favour of war. Plenty of people make arguments in favour of war all the time, including rights to self-defence or against tyranny and stuff like that. So, I mean, unless you're going to take an absolutely pacifist view of the world, which I would argue encourages even more violence, I just think that as heartless as it sounds, deaths occur.
So I think, again, I don't want it to be technical, so I want to have this conversation about what this debate represents a little bit more, which I think is very interesting. Because the idea of, smoking, there's a recent survey which showed that 30% of 45-year-olds in China would die from smoking. However, it's a free choice. They enjoy it, as it happens. They enjoy it. So actually, you have to then balance these things of freedom with the harms that occur. Thousands of people die every year in road accidents, but the social benefit that arises, especially in developing economies, is fantastic compared to the deaths. And even with the deaths, it's kind of worth it as a social progressive move, I would argue. Okay? And then in terms of the virtual reality thing, which I think is very interesting, I'm old enough to remember the 1970s when I had on my bedroom wall a full-size picture of an autumnal forest, where I could pretend that I'd never get to go on holiday there, but I could pretend to be there lying in my bed. That was my virtual reality world, okay? And it fitted into this conversation about the Labour Party in the 1990s coming in with a transport policy of reducing the need to travel. Reducing the need to travel. I think we should travel more. Yes, I think travel, mobility is a fantastic opportunity. It gives you release, travel broadens the mind. And I think that if reducing the need to travel has become internalized as a way that we see mobility, then suddenly you have to ask ourselves, why are we having this conversation about fantastically innovative transport technologies, right? Because we still see travel as harmful, we still see it as risky, we still see it as murderous, we still see it as environmentally damaging, and yet we're now trying to encourage more transport. So there's an imbalance in this conversation, and I'd like to work out why it is, what actually is going on. That's my thought.
I'm David Wood from the London Futurist. I find your framing quite incredible, really. Nobody's saying that we're going to have less travel. We're saying, on the contrary, we're going to have travel with autonomous vehicles, which is safer, which will give people more freedom to get where they want to go to, which will also be environmentally better, because the cars, if they're going to crash less often, will have be smaller and will therefore consume less, and there will be less damage as they drive around. So I find this framing very strange. When it comes to this question of how much freedom should we give up in order for this safety, what I heard from you, Jason, and I'll give you some merit for painting an incredible position, it's worth putting up for debate. You've basically said that if in the future you have a choice of two ways of driving, one with an intelligent autonomous vehicle that will get you there more reliably and safer, and secondly, when you drive it yourself, you will choose to drive it yourself, even though there's more risk to you and more risk to the rest of us. If you, by being distracted or drunk or tired or angry or whatever, you come off the road and kill my mother or my friend, and you want that freedom despite. So would you also say you want the freedom to get rid of safety belts? Because after all, safety belts are an intrusion. And I guess you'd have to be prepared to pay extra insurance, because you're more likely then to suffer damage and cost the NHS some additional costs. Would you also, if you were in the 1960s and 1970s, would you be on the side of the car manufacturers who were trying to suppress at the time the reports from Ralph Nader about the unsafe aspects of cars? As he was pointing out, look, these cars are because they're flimsy, because they've got designed badly, they're more likely to explode when they collide. And the car manufacturers didn't like this information getting out at all, and they tried to shut down Ralph Nader and other campaigners. Would you have been on trying to shut him down as well? Because after all, you want people to have as much freedom as possible. If they want to pay less money and get an unsafe car, they should have that freedom. Is that the extension of what you are arguing here?
I think there are a couple of things that you can see that kind of come out so far. People saying, do you want autonomous vehicles? Is that something society actually wants, a path we want to go down? There's another thing with regards to large companies like Tesla, Google, Apple who are developing this. While there is fantastic expertise in autonomous vehicles at places like Transport Systems Catapult, European Union projects on the area, there's not much knowledge about this in the public sphere. Most of it's in private companies. When this is developing into a public policy problem, do we want this? How are we going to regulate it? We have some precedents. We've had autopilots in planes since the 1940s, so we're not in a complete legal black hole. As automated vehicles are coming in now, so the update everyone can download for about $2,500 to the modern Tesla vehicles, lets them go on highways. What are the public policy steps we take as a society, the mechanisms we put in place tomorrow, next week, next year, in order to approach this issue, rather than just kind of speculate about it in the future? What are the actual steps we are going to take or should take?
The conversation has demonstrated some significant benefits from this accelerating technology. I've got 2 disabled people in my family, and I spend between 15 and 20% of my working days providing transportation for them. And I would love it if I could conjure up a personalized, one-to-one, door-to-door private train, which essentially is what a driverless car would be. And I don't think that using a train necessarily makes me less able or somehow puts me to sleep. So I'm not concerned with that. I think there's a process through which we as an intelligent society could go through to integrate new technology. I have to drive, when I go to the motorway, I have to drive down this lane. I find it really annoying, but I respectfully get out of the way of the horses that are often down this particular lane. And we've managed to sort of integrate these 2 forms of transport for about 100 years now. And it seems to work, and we kind of provide, there's a level of tolerance from one to the other. The concern for me, however, with driverless cars, and I'm a fan of technology, I've declared my interest in the personalized one-to-one train. The concern I do have, which I don't think we're really talking about, is that in order to really exploit this technology, we need and could significantly benefit from a high level of connectedness in terms of the digital backbone. And connectedness meaning that actually cars eventually will know about each other. And they will know about each other through some sort of a grid. And I remember living in Leeds quite a long time ago now, during the miners' strike, when the police decided that they would block the motorways. And anyone who looked like a miner on his or her way to an event, in those days there was quite a lot of activity around the pits during the miners' strike, they simply stopped them. And I don't know if that was legal, illegal, but they made the decision to do that. It seems to me that with the sort of nanny approach that we have today, where even the left is arguing for state sanctions or state imposition of controls and restrictions in order to protect ourselves because we can't even look after our own safety, that we're actually going to have this relatively technical discussion about how we integrate driverless cars, but in a way that actually allows and encourages the state to manage the controls of what car can drive when and where, until ultimately it doesn't take a great deal for there to be a switch that simply says, well, this group of people can't drive today because we don't want them to. And it's as simple as that. I don't think we're talking about that. We're having a technical discussion as if somehow all this was under the control of intelligent people sitting in a room having a rational debate. I don't think that's actually how it's going to work. It's not going to be the horse or the car. It's actually going to be a government with a conveyor belt and momentum, and actually often supported by well-meaning, I'm going to use the word liberal, I realise I may be using that incorrectly now from this morning's debate, but it's going to be a discussion which actually encourages the government to take more and more control over what we can do on the road, and that to me is a much, much greater question.
I would like to try and, as you said, Austin, get a little under what's really behind this discussion and just interrogate that a bit more, because I'm slightly concerned by what I'm hearing from the platform. You see, it's quite staggering to me that we're talking about something that is potentially quite technologically innovative, quite brilliant in its application of what it could possibly do. And really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to limit human agency. We're trying to say that the real problem that we're facing is this unpredictable thing called the human being, who, we could make much safer, we could make better, etc. Now, I'm not saying that we should have unsafety, we should have more deaths on the road, but it seems to me that what's really being posited, and this perhaps is an expression of the fact that I think this is a conversation about very low horizons and low ambitions, is it possible to have a machine that has moral agency, that has the ability to make decisions that human beings have to make in an unpredictable world? Now, in a world of automation, where you can have algorithms who will, if-then consequences, that's not how the world works. The world is unpredictable. The world is changing. Nature is changing. There's nothing predictable. So what you are positing to me is that we can predict everything, and that we can anticipate, we can build systems that will be able to exercise moral agency. Now, I think that that's a dream. I think what you're doing is you're actually denigrating what it means to be human. And that's really the thing that bothers me about this conversation, because really stand back for a second and ask yourselves what we're talking about. We're talking about automating what already exists in society. Why are we not imagining this in a different way altogether? You take the driver out of the car, is it a car? I would argue that it's not. It's no longer a car. The car was always conceived with the human being as being at the driving wheel, at being in control, of being an expression of human autonomy and agency. You want to take that out, but you still want the car. Well, ladies and gentlemen on the panel, don't you think we should be a little more ambitious about what this technology could actually do? Could we not reconfigure what transport or mobility might look like in the future, which is not based upon the infrastructure that we have today? And it just brings me to my final point, which is that I think there's also an enormous amount of hype and nonsense spoken about how far we are, how close we are to autonomous vehicles. If you analyze what Google are actually doing, the 200,000 miles that they say their autonomous car has driven is driven in the same area, around Mountain View, where they have mapped that at the level of not Google Maps, it's like Google Maps on steroids, because they've had to map every single thing so that the car is able to interpret the environment around it at a level that cannot just be done in the way that Tesla are posing. That is not autonomous whatsoever. That's a few sensors picking up where cars are or whatever. More than that, you're going to need an infrastructure that will allow you to do that. I don't see where any of the investment of that's going to come from. You're going to have to reconfigure urban infrastructure 100%. Where's the ambition for that? I don't see that. I mean, you can't even get a signal when you when you go in the train from London to Gatwick Airport. I would, autonomous vehicles, please God, never.
Right, sort that out.
Can a machine have moral agency? I don't know. I mean, I studied philosophy. There's maybe something to pantheism. I'm just not sure about frying pantheism. Seatbelts, you don't want to wear a seatbelt, you want to go through the windscreen, that's your business. Nobody, I mean, I don't understand why people don't wear seatbelts. I believe it's still a problem in some American states that people just won't put the damn things on. But they're really only harming themselves, so I'm not particularly bothered by it. I do not carry a brief for any automobile company or the industry. They shouldn't have suppressed reports on the dangers of cars. I don't care. If companies find it difficult to make their cars not explode when someone drives into them, as was the case with the Ford Pinto, they should not build defective products in the first place, and they should be punished when they do. I'm not a libertarian. I'm a liberal. What I would say to you is, I'm not naturally pessimistic, but from my point of view, if this is a binary debate between drivers and autonomous cars, I think I've lost. I think the autonomous cars will win, unlike Paul, who thinks the opposite. So I wouldn't worry too much that there's someone up here saying I don't like autonomous cars or I think they're a threat to human freedom. I do think those things, but I work for newspapers. I'm used to watching all of you people going, "You're all mad, what are you doing? This thing's in your interests," and you just look at me and say it's out of date, we don't care anymore. But, you know, I've started working with this new technology called television. I'm hoping it might catch on.
I thought your point about the ability of the government or the police to control mobility is a really interesting one, and it is not being addressed. And it will be a real issue because within, again, I think the next 20 years, cars will be communicating and connected to each other. I was at a demonstration in France at a conference last week where OnStar was demonstrating a ability so that the police, if you have OnStar in your vehicle and the police are after you, they can, with a mobile app, turn off your engine in your car. And most new cars have something like OnStar in it, where it's the ability to remotely open the doors or turn off the engine is there. If you take that to the connected car level now, you could have, let's say there's a demonstration that's unpopular with the government going on, and all traffic is now routed around that area so no one's aware of it. And maybe that's not even visible to anyone. So who's controlling that network, and when can the government change your route or decide if you're going or not going somewhere is a real issue that needs to be addressed. And I'm a libertarian in much of my thinking, and I think that the automated vehicles in many ways will provide mobility to people that don't have it now. So
there's a case of providing mobility, but it's almost a case of at what cost. Do we really want to live in a society where the government or the police get to decide all of these steps for us? Yeah, in some cases they might be beneficial to us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that should happen. I think that we all have free will and we should be able to sort of act in accordance with that, and I think that's sort of one of the big issues with autonomous vehicles is almost that debate. However, I do think that the rise of Internet of Things, cars will be connected to be able to connect with other cars and be able to connect with people and infrastructures, and sort of that will evolve and grow driver behaviours, reduce accidents and increase safety in those respects. I think having autonomous features or semi-autonomous features or more like smart features rather than a fully autonomous vehicle is the way forward, and then as that evolves and as that encourages, then maybe that autonomous vehicles will have a place in our society.
We are already connected, we're already sensed, we already have vehicles that can communicate with each other. Our movements are already being picked up and have been for many years. So we shouldn't look at this as being something of the future. It's already here, actually. So I don't believe it's being used for bad purposes at this moment in time. That's not to say it couldn't be, and I think that we're in the transition phase, and these kinds of discussions about ethics and morals and control and political purpose are the kinds of discussions that we need to have as part of this. What is the policy that takes this forward? I think that actually, those questions are the interesting ones, because we are going to where we're going. We have choices about how we get there, and it's necessary for us to look at the best routes there, the routes that balance for us ideas of individual freedom, privacy, but also maximising the benefits, because we are in danger of throwing out the baby with the bath water on this if we're not careful. So we want to maximise the benefits that come out of it. But the policies, I think, that will enable this to come forward are for us to look at the human interface with technology, and for us to decide where we want to be. So we don't want technology to be driving the policy. We as humans and as society, we drive the policy, and technology aligns with us.
Well, I'm disappointed in myself because I thought I'd hopefully got across the idea of looking beyond cars, etc., and reconfiguring everything, but obviously I didn't do that. But that made me think of ambition, because in some ways there's almost, you could see two types of ambition. You could have the ambition like they have in China, where they're largely taking existing technologies with their fast trains and basically just doing more of it on a really ambitious program, a building program. But it ties in a bit with what you said, Austin. It's very difficult to have ambition in some ways without being a bit sci-fi about it. If you're thinking of something completely new, something to transcend driving or transport now, it's very difficult to not be a bit sci-fi about it without new ideas coming around. So I've got no answer to that, but I just thought I wanted to push it out. To bring back things to now, I'm interested in congestion, because I mean, even with cars as it is now, there's congestion problems in the UK, okay? You could build roads if it's the open countryside or whatever, that's suitable. You've got London, say, or Cambridge or things like this. You know, to me, an obvious solution is to build tunnels and stuff like this. I mean, to me, there should be 7-channel tunnels or something, you know, to people to drive across without having to go on silly trains and stuff like that. But, you know, you could solve lots of the problems of congestion by simply building more. Now, you have to ask, why are we not doing that? It's certainly not a lack of technology. I'm sure tunnelling can be made a lot more efficient than it is now, but there seems to be a lack of will to almost reconfigure the landscape by actually doing things to the landscape. Everything wants to be a light touch, just making a bit more of what we're doing with now, where driverless cars do fit into that kind of thing, trying to, you know, having these caravans of cars, or whatever you want to call them, to use the motorway more efficiently. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but another solution is just to build more roads. And if you say, where are they? Well, we can build them underground.
The proponents of driverless cars, what are you offering that wouldn't be resolved by just better public transport?
There are times when having an autonomous vehicle is useful, but I still want to be able to drive a car when I felt I wished to.
The debate seems a bit blinkered, really. I mean, it seems that the only benefit of a driverless car is safety, and it assumes that it can only be introduced in this sort of paternalistic, authoritarian sort of social context we're in. Couldn't we make the libertarian argument for this technology, which would give you more choice to do what you want in the car, and also in a different sort of policy context, you could have platooning up motorways and being able to get to places at 150 miles an hour. So isn't there a libertarian case for this technology if you separate the technology from the context it's introduced?
Nico McDonald, Big Potatoes. I'm sympathetic to Paul and Jason's argument that we're not being ambitious enough. And it tends to be when new technologies are invented or created, they're created to solve one problem, but very quickly whole new uses and industries are created around them. And it seems to me not very ambitious just to be trying to automate driving, which we have some pretty good systems evolved over 130 years for. And actually, I'd be interested to know from each panelist what the most unexpected large-scale use of autonomous vehicles might be. And think back to Vodafone, where Paul almost worked 30 years ago, who simply wanted us to be able to make phone calls when we're out and about. They didn't anticipate video sex between young people over mobile devices, or any of the other large-scale activities which go on via smartphones today.
You have 30 seconds in reverse order.
Ultimately, my main point is I don't see that the autonomous vehicles can ever be the dominant form of personal transport around that's whatever, and I think it's a bit of a, there are benefits that can come from it, but I just don't think it'll be dominant.
I spent quite a lot of my time thinking about how to get people out of cars actually onto public transport. I think I'd like to hear the definition of what better public transport actually means. I have heard arguments of expanding the definition of public transport, and I think the interesting prospect is that it is expanded to include on-demand public transport, which then expands into on-demand personal vehicle, which turns up at your house, which then I think is not a million miles away from having a pool of autonomous vehicles at the end of the road. So I think it's all on a spectrum, but it's actually, I come back to what I say, it's about people having access to goods, to education, to services and to social interaction. So driving on its own is not a means to an end. It is a means to an end, and that end is access to these other things, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. We're not in the business, I think, of creating a brand new way of driving just for the sake of driving. It's about access to goods and services. I think the most innovative thing that I would like to see happening in a autonomous car is actually people having quality of life, being able to sleep, being able to rest, being able to be a human being, because what we're all short on, particularly in the UK, is time. We're a very time-poor society. Yeah.
I see the autonomous vehicle, connected vehicle, as liberating in that I think traffic flow will become much better and faster. Traffic jams should be reduced, maybe eliminated. Some people think that's possible. And so you're able to use that time productively. I spend an hour every day driving to work, and it's not fun. It's wasted time in my mind, and it's dangerous. So I won't miss that. Just one thought on your question in the back about the what are the things that are unexpected that are going to come from this? And I think that's the really interesting question. And if we knew that, we'd all be wealthy shortly, you know. But I think, in my mind, the most likely areas that are going to develop are around the idea that people now expect to get what they want, when they want it, where they want it, instantly, and the ability to move goods in an automated way and get that delivery of whatever it is to people when they want it those will be the big market opportunities, I think. Nicole.
Yeah. In terms of better public transport, that's not going to eradicate the need to drive. I used public transport for many years. What I enjoy about driving is the fact that I can get in a car directly from outside my house and it stops me directly where I need to go. Public transport, no matter how close you can get a bus stop or how close you can get a train station, still won't necessarily do that. Building on what you said about autonomous vehicles, I think the idea of maybe having an autonomous vehicle will change the complete design of a vehicle, or maybe having it connected to your house and your infrastructure and it being a part of the home might be something interesting and innovative that we can then do with that kind of future.
Choice. Someone mentioned you won't have any, the insurance companies will put you off the road. Is there a libertarian argument for these cars? Yeah, sure, but it's not my argument to make. What the most innovative use would be for autonomous vehicles? Well, when we have no taxi drivers, no truck drivers, no van drivers, no journalists, and nobody doing any other work, perhaps the autonomous vehicles can all bring us down to the dole office. Or maybe when the robots get put out of work, the autonomous vehicles can bring the robots down to the dole office. I don't know. That's the future I see.
Always end on a high note, I say. Can we have a round of applause, please?